Hello, lovers and light slingers. My name is TB Skyn, and let's get started on all of the stuff that Riot have dropped on our heads. And we'll start with an animation breakdown of the Senna release trailer. But in order to do that, first we kind of have to discuss the trilogy that it actually is. So I've edited together 3 pieces of media that make up the actual teaser for Senna. First, we have this, which is the Dark... what's it called? Dark Passage? I think so. Anyway, it's the teaser that they first put out where Lucian is going to the Shadow Isles, or something that looks very similar to it, and he's gonna go and free his lovely lady wife, or at least end it. This here, though, is The Climb, which is a teaser for the 2018 ranked season. It was put up in January 2018, like a year and 9 months ago at this point. Probably more, honestly. And this is also part of it, because we go from Lucian charging at Thresh right here to Lucian completing his charge against Thresh right there, and then we get into the actual fight of the thing that happens. So this is Riot basically flexing on us a little bit, saying, we had set up this a million years in advance. We knew exactly what was going to happen over a year ago. And because it was over a year ago, I don't think this part was done over a year ago, because over a year ago, Senna presumably will still have been in production. They're still going to have been working on her kit. They're still going to have been working on finalizing a lot of what she's about. So while they could easily have made all the Thresh Lucian bits of this animated teaser as much as a year in advance if they wanted to, they probably had to wait for a while for Senna to be completely finalized so that they don't put something in the trailer that's, completely different from what ends up in the actual game. And this is something... I was talking to Laurie Goulding and Anthony Reynolds, who are an editor and a writer at Riot Games, for my Legends of Bilgewater sort of post-mortem look back at that particular thing, and they were teasing me. Like, they were saying, oh, we've been setting stuff up years in advance. We've really been laying the groundwork for all kinds of things. They knew! They were talking to me while they knew. And boy, must they have felt pleased with themselves. And so the question, of course, this invites is that, well, if the Lucian bit was a teaser for something that happened like a year and 10 months almost down the line, year and 9 months, 10 months down the line, was the Yasuo bit a teaser for something? Was the I think Talia has a bit in The Climb as well? Like, was that a teaser? Like, what else are they teasing right now? And that, of course, is the bonus for Riot Games, because if it turns out that they're not teasing anything with those bits, like, those bits were just vignettes that weren't really supposed to tease anything or communicate anything, but the Lucian bit, oh, that was the one. That was definitely the one that teased something. Then it's like, fine. Nobody can really criticize them for that, but if it teases more than one thing, or if they just decide to follow up on something at any time in the future, everyone's going to go back at it and go like, oh my god, they set it up a million years in advance, there's the galaxy brain, and so on and so on. So they've set that up very nicely for themselves. Very well done, Riot. Very well done. I have respect for the hustle on that particular one. So let's start with this bit, the Dark Passage. I didn't really do an animation breakdown of this thing proper the first time around, because it's very short and there really isn't a lot to break down, but there is some follow-up from Lucian's newest color story, which I think was called Homebound. I keep thinking it's called Unbound, but it's not. Where one of the things that Lucian comes to realize over the course of that story is that he's playing Thresh's game, and he has been playing Thresh's game this whole time. Thresh is tormenting him with Senna. He's using Senna to draw Lucian ever more into a desperate, quest for revenge and to save his lady wife, that Thresh can just keep denying him and thus prolong his torment. And that's kind of followed up on a little bit here, in that there's a very explicit connection being made between Lucian and Thresh in these images here. Like we see literally the idea that Thresh is inside Lucian's head. Like, in the most literal way possible, he is inside Lucian's head. But also the darker implication that by chasing Senna so hard, by abandoning everything else and dedicating his life to chasing down Thresh, he has also helped Thresh torment Senna, because the thing that Senna fears the most above all else is that Lucian would come and join her in the Lantern, like would become another soul trapped by Thresh in eternal torment along with her. Like, that's the one thing she doesn't want, and the more that Lucian keeps chasing Thresh, the more likely that becomes, and thus the more tormented she is by the behavior of her lover. And so, like, this idea that Lucian, in chasing vengeance so desperately, was essentially kind of becoming Thresh, or becoming, like, being a part of that game, being a part of that torment, is part of what Lucian has been wrestling with himself, is like that realization that, no, I can't keep playing Thresh's game, this has to end. And so what he goes to the Shadow Isles to do, apparently, is not so much attempt to free Senna or revive Senna or take revenge for Senna, but just to destroy the goddamn lantern, to break the prison in which she's trapped, and hopefully free her from the torment, even if it's at the cost of his own life. And that seems to be the task that he has undertaken for himself. And over the course of attempting that, he manages to lose in a 1v1 duel with a support, which is, frankly, I know we're not supposed to put, like, the in-game mechanics into the actual video game, but seriously, like, there's no Thresh in the world that, like, wins a 1v1 duel with an even reasonably competent Lucian. Now, this bit here, this is just a little detail that I haven't examined yet, but which I'm kind of curious about. Yeah. Why does it light up under his feet? It's not important at all. It's just there's cracks in the floor, I guess, and there's light underneath them. So let's have a look at the actual animation as it is. We'll not look at the climb, because I looked at that one back in the day, but notable that the reason Lucian's coat in the Senna short is so damaged is because, well, all of these guys tore it up. And the video quality, unfortunately, is not quite what I would like on this thing. I edited it together myself, and then I uploaded it to YouTube, which means the poor damn thing had to go through YouTube compression twice, and that just does terrible things to a video. But I do like that we start in a not necessarily a calm place, because Lucian is clearly agitated about something, but we start in a slow place, because, like, where we come into this teaser is after this. Right, like, after a massive action sequence of Lucian, shooty, bang, bang, like, all of this action and chaos and nonsense. But that was, like, over a year ago? So if you just started a short with Lucian, like everything exploding, and he's fighting Thresh and stuff like that, probably visually confusing. So when you start on this extreme slow-mo, where you start, okay, we're establishing characters, here's Lucian, he's firing his gun, okay. Who's he firing it at? Oh, hey, it's Thresh. He's down there. Okay. Lucian's there. Thresh is there. And who else is there? Well, now, isn't that interesting? And what it's unclear to me, though, looking at this footage in full motion, it's really not clear to me whether or not Lucian's shot hits the lantern here. But it's clear that he's aiming for it. Like, it's clear that the lantern is the thing he's after. He's not really after Thresh. He's trying to get to her. And also, speaking of the idea of Lucian and Thresh as, like, accomplices, as it were, in Senna's torment, even if Lucian didn't want to be, he spots her in the lantern, and then we see Lucian through her eyes, and that's the thing that gives him pause. Being seen by his lady wife again, and, like, with the understanding that, oh shit, I have actually kind of not been helping this whole time. I've actually kind of been making it a little bit worse. That seems to be what kind of gives that kind of stops him in his tracks here, and almost gets him hit with a Thresh hook. I mean, honestly. And then we get this bit, and there's one thing that I really like about these shots, and that's Lucian's dreads. I really like how they're animated, and again, because the video compression is so garbage, it's gonna be impossible to really see proper. Take a look, like, the dreads are here, and take a look how they kind of swing and flail and tumble around as Lucian does, and here they are, like, swinging over his head, and it does such a good job of accentuating his motion. And yet, when he lands, the dreads are conveniently slung back over his back where they're supposed to be, so that he doesn't have dreads hanging all over his face. And that's the thing of like, That's something that's always kind of the tension when you're dealing with character models like this, where you have to keep them on model, which means they have to look like themselves. They have to look like their character design as much as possible, but you also have to break and deform and mess that model up in order to really communicate the action. And hair is one of the troublesome ones, because like we tend to identify characters with specific hairstyles. Like Lucian is identified with having the dreadlocks back. He's not really identified with having the dreadlocks hanging all over his face. And so, like, breaking them open like that would deny us this look of Lucian. Like, it's not really like a thing of, oh, if we let the dreadlocks fly, no one will recognize him. It's not really that. It's just a thing of, like, visual consistency, basically. And that's a directorial choice. Like, that's up to the sometimes the director, sometimes the animator. Like, is it better if we have the whole thing flailing around in chaos, or is it better if we have the whole thing like under control so that he looks like, air quotes, himself? And there's no right or wrong choice there, really. It comes down to the kind of mood that you want to communicate. And my feeling is, if Lucian's dreads had been like all over the place and like flying all over at this point, he would look all disheveled and wild and messed up, like he's chaotic, like he doesn't have a plan. But Lucian very clearly does have a plan. Like, he has a very specific objective in mind with this whole expedition, which is, in the narrative of the thing, is probably the reason why he's getting his ass kicked by Thresh so much. It's because, well, he's not really trying to fight Thresh. As you can see from this shot, like, we hit here, and then here we see Lucian from Thresh's perspective. Here we see Thresh from Lucian's perspective, but he's not looking at Thresh. He doesn't care about Skeleton Man. He cares about only one thing. It's not a duel between Lucian and Thresh, it's a duel between Lucian and the lantern. Like, this is the like, this is that shot, that cowboy shot. But we've barely seen Thresh's face. Like, he's not an important character, really, in what's going on here. And this continues all throughout the fight scene. We're constantly getting shots of Lucian, but we barely really get to see Thresh's perspective on much of anything. And you can kind of see that in the way that the camera treats him. Like, his face is like, it doesn't matter. The lantern is coming closer. Lucian has this thing close to him. And again, Thresh's face, finally, sort of, we're forced to confront the fact that Thresh is here. And yet, he's not stabbing Thresh here. Boom. Again, and I really like that visual storytelling, that Thresh really wants to be the center of attention. Like, he's like, yeah, I have you now. I'm going to torment you, torture. And Lucian doesn't really care. Like, he has given up on the hatred for Thresh to a large extent, in favor of, I'm gonna fucking break the prison. Like, I'm gonna get her out. I'm gonna save her. It's the only thing I care about now. And I like that. Like, that visual storytelling is subtle, and it's not important in the sense of, like, yeah, it's there if you want to look for it, but if you don't want to look for it, you still get all of this. All of this cool-ass nonsense. All of this boom, pow, pow, bang, 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 wow, wow. All of this fun and nonsense. Can you tell that I'm a little bit loopy today? Anyway, this is just really cool fight animation. I wish the fight was longer. Like, that's my only gripe, is that we get a small exchange here of, like, back and forth with, like, Lucian dashing around and trying to hit the lantern, which is why he's failing to hit Thresh. And Thresh trying to capture him, but we only really get, like, what? Yeah, 10, 15 seconds, maybe? Like, that's about it. And then Thresh manages to disarm Lucian, and then we go into the whole confrontation thing, and then into the Senna thing. And that's because we only have 3 minutes and 20 to work with, obviously. But for me, I would really have liked to see a more extended fight sequence, where it's like, where it becomes really clear that Lucian is intentionally ignoring Thresh, and that he's going for the lantern, like that, like some more teases where Lucian is like, he's so close to hitting the lantern, or you can see him really kind of focus in on it, or a shot that just whizzes right by, like just a bit more, so that we really get to a point where we can kind of feel that Lucian has completely exhausted himself in this fight, finally letting Thresh catch him. Because that's kind of my sense of it, is that when Lucian does this whole charge, like that's him trying to get to the damn lantern, right? Like, when he charges right into Thresh's face with only one weapon. And you can see Thresh pulling the lantern away right at the right moment. That's Lucian trying to get to the lantern, and I would have liked to see, like, it's not clear to me whether Lucian does this intentionally, like, gets himself in trouble intentionally so that Thresh will come close to torment him, and he was maybe hoping to have his gun rather than just having the broken shard of the gun, or if this is just an accident that Lucian takes advantage of. Like, that's not really clear to me, and that, again, that's where I would have liked a little bit, slightly longer amount of storytelling after this shot here, where we see Lucian is clearly, like, he's planning his move, because we go from the shot of the lantern, Lucian sees it, he stares at it, okay, and now he's making his plan and he's making his move. And with more time for the fight sequence to go around, like with more of the choreography to tell the story, I think you could have made a greater sense of what is it Lucian is trying to do. And it would have been more of a payoff when he finally manages to destroy the lantern. Speaking of payoffs, by the way, Thresh manages to break Lucian's gun. Now, I'm not 100% sure, but in Homebound, Lucian mentions that one of his guns is actually in kind of poor repair. Like, he's been using it a lot, he hasn't been doing proper maintenance on it. It needs to be repaired. There's a break in it somewhere that means it's in danger of falling apart. And I wonder if that's the gun that Thresh hits right here. And again, I really wish Riot would upload these things in 4K. Because, like, look at all this blur. Like, all these compression artifacts, jeez. But yeah, that to me, that seems like a payoff for that. Like, that one of Lucian's guns is broken. And if I'm not much mistaken, it's actually Senna's gun, specifically. I believe this is Senna's old gun, but I could be wrong about it. So, let's go back. Let's go back to the fight sequence, because that's, you know, it remains the coolest bit of this thing. I do like that. Lucian gets up, starts to fire. Look what Thresh does. He rotates his lantern out of the way. He swings the lantern around, spins, and here comes the hook. Also, the lighting in this thing, we'll talk about that when Senna starts to appear. The lighting in this thing is really well made. And I do like the effect on Lucian's dash. And again, 4K, please. Like that's how they render Lucian's dash. He's here, then he becomes a streak of light, and then the streak of light moves. So it's not, he doesn't start the movement, he just becomes the movement all of a sudden. And then there's the easing out, where you can see he lands here, and then there's a little bit of like, the glow persists as he moves. And then, yeah, again, the blur is making this really hard to tell, but you can kind of see how the motion is kind of disjointed, like it's boom, boom, boom. Like, it's that very quick, snappy, where he manages to move forward, and from here and then into the air, there's this kind of secondary snap, almost, where he suddenly appears in midair from a jump, and then there's this lovely shot. And again, you can see he becomes the glow, and then the streak flies away. And here comes Thresh's. It's like the glow comes first, and then the dash. Which I think is an interesting way to do it. Like, because if you'd had him start the movement first, and then follow up with a dash, that's more like how they do it with Tracer, I think, in Overwatch, really. You get a different feeling kind of movement, like, but if it's the thing where he becomes the flash of light and then moves, it gives you, I think it gives you more of that suddenness, that's more of that pow, poof, like more of that. And that works really well for Lucian, the way that he's being animated here. Because they are supposed to be like, it's supposed to be like he's a streak of light, like he's a light photon that just all of a sudden, poof, pops from one place to another almost. Oh, YouTube compression, you are a bastard. I do like, again, speaking of, by the way, speaking of parallels between Lucian and Thresh, guess who else has things coming off his head that swing around wildly but are usually positioned behind him when it comes to, like, wild action? Guess who else has something that vaguely sort of slightly resembles dreadlocks on his head? I just thought, I don't know if that's necessarily intentional, but I thought that was always a nice parallel between Lucian and Thresh, that they have that little, they have that little bit of character parody, which is something that the teaser, the Dark Passage teaser, also takes advantage of, in that when we get that Thresh being overlaid onto Lucian's face, Lucian has this giant collar around his neck, and Thresh has exactly the same thing. And here, again, this is where I'd really wish there was more of a fight sequence, because here Lucian specifically hits the lantern. And what's interesting is that I think they've just overlaid... Huh, that's something I didn't expect, actually. It seems to me that Lucian's laser bolt here is actually just... Well, I say just, but you can see how it kind of stays still in the image, while the camera and the environment and everything else kind of moves around it, but it doesn't seem to move with the environment. But that says to me that it's something that, like, when they do the animation for the effects, they do a light burst here, and then they overlay that thing as a secondary layer? I don't know. I don't actually know that for sure. I love the effects on Thresh, like the glowing green animation effects, his Shadow Isles effects, because like most Shadow Isles champions are teal, like they tend towards the dark, more bluish, kind of colder, greenish flame, but Thresh has always been one of the bright green ones, which contrasts him nicely with the environment. You can see it here, like if Thresh had been all bluish, cyan, teal, glowing here, I feel like he would probably blend a little bit too much into the background of the environment, so that color contrast is really good. And I do like that, like, we get a sense that Thresh is actually a very clever fighter, in the sense that here, he smashes his hook into the ground, and then Lucian promptly ignores it, which allows Thresh to pull that move. Like, to basically just drag the hook back. Which is like a clever move. Like, it shows that the guy knows how to fight with his thing. He's not just trying to lash people. He knows how to be strategic about it. And then, you know, he retracts it in, and Lucian comes in for close combat, and then he's ready with the swing. And you can kind of see how he's setting up each of his moves, right? Like, he has a plan for what he's doing. Smack it down there, let it stay, boom. Crack, get the guy, and then Lucian comes in, parry the weapon, smack him with a lantern, and then, like, transition that movement into throwing the hook. So you can see how he shifts his weight around on his feet, right? Let's see if we can find... Yeah, here. Here he's moving, he's turning his body around, getting ready for Lucian to come in. And you can see how he's lifting his leg over and, like, pivoting his weight around his center of mass. And there it comes down. And so his weight lands primarily on his back leg, I think, there. Supported by the front leg. And then he pushes off with that leg. Pushes that forward, and boom, that kind of leads the lantern in. And then he lands there, and then he rotates around his hip again to throw the hook out that way. Like, and it's a really well-coordinated motion. Like, and it's just good animation. Like, it's just solid animation. And I really like the way that Thresh uses his weight when he throws his hook around. Look at this. Like, when he's pulling Lucian to the ground. Look how and again, chaotic head tentacles, all calm. This is a slight disconnect between the two shots that I'm a little bit Like, here, Lucian's dreadlocks have just settled down completely from shot to shot with no explained reason. It doesn't matter because no one notices that when it's in full motion, but it's just a little inconsistency. But see how Thresh pulls Lucian to the ground. First, he drops his entire body weight. Like, his entire body, he just drops down. And then his arm follows, and there you can see it even almost looks like it's stretching out because there's almost that elastic feeling as he makes the full pull to get Lucian to his knees. And I really like that's one of the basic principles of character animation, is how do you move the character's weight around, but I like how not consistently, but how well it's used with Thresh, like that he really puts his weight into what he does with the chains, and you can kind of see that also here. And again, Lucian shot, heading straight for the lantern. Misses, but he's heading for the lantern. You can also see it here, like how he's constantly pivoting around his hip to control the movement of the scythe, and it's letting it swing by there. And then how, like, he goes from here, where his weight is like on that leg, to needing to transition that swing into something that can go at Lucian, and you can see how he transitions his weight from pivot to pivot, and then he really brings it down. And again, he's using the weight of his body, or his movement implies that he's using the weight of his body to bring it over his head, and then you can see how he drops his entire body to swing the thing down with maximum power. And that's what gives that arc such a scythe to it. Like, it's that power that's being stored there. But it also leaves him in a slightly vulnerable position, which, again, is seemingly calculated by Thresh, which allows Lucian to get a shot off on the lantern, which is the target that he's been going for the whole time. And now we transition out of the action into the more subtle character acting, and here's where we see something, well, actually, we can see that earlier, I think. Where's the shot with the lantern? It's here. Here's a bit of lovely, subtle character acting. Thresh is constantly billowing with fire and smoke and stuff, right? Look at how that happens in his cloak as well. Like, even his coat is kind of alive with like a ghostly wind or spirits kind of animating it. So he has that ghostly feel to him, where he's like constantly being shifted around by something, which is the classic ghost imagery, right? Like a flying specter of some sort that's kind of billowing in the wind. By contrast, Lucian is completely still. Like, he doesn't move a muscle almost until he bursts into action. So where Lucian is all the, like, this constant rhythm of stillness, sudden motion, stillness, sudden motion, which also comes across in his W, his dash. Like, stillness, sudden motion. You can see that happening here. Like, he goes from a moment of stillness, sudden motion, and then stillness, sudden motion, stillness, and so on and so on. So there's different rhythms to how the characters move, like how their entire character models animate, and you can even see that really kind of here with this slow-mo shot as Thresh smashes Lucian's gun. Look at all of that. Like, just, it's even here now during the fight, it's still billowing around as though it's being thrown around by the wind. Also by Thresh's motion, of course, but like that movement language is constantly, you can see it here in the shot when Thresh walks towards him. That movement language is constantly present, sort of passively in Thresh as a character. There's constantly that hovering spookiness around him. So now let's get some of the subtle character acting. Here's where Lucian's character model, to me, like, one of the things about his character design is that every part of him is designed to look angry all the time. And this, you can especially see that in close-ups on his face, like... Right? Like, like his eyebrows, completely, like this, almost like 90s comics edginess, where the entire brow of his forehead is kind of creased downwards to really give him that, I'm angry, my wife is dead, like that the whole time. And that's something about Lucian's character design that always kind of bothered me a little bit. Like, he doesn't really... It's that 90s comics thing. Like, if you remember, like, 90s Rob Liefeld comics especially, every single goddamn character would have a face that looked like this all of the time. Like, there's no such fucking thing as a smile in 90s comics. It was awful. But you have this design of the facial anatomy that kind of just posits that the eyebrows are always down, that the brow is always creased, that you always have these little folds of, like, strain right in the middle of the face, so you can be badass and angry about everything all the time. Like, if you try and do that with your face, like, even, like, you start sounding like this. Like, you can't not sound a little bit angry when you do it. Like, and that's the thing about Lucian's character model is, like, I was always a little bit worried about, like, how the hell are you going to make that do acting? Like, how are you going to make that display any emotion other than pissed off all the time? But they do manage it. Like, still his eyebrows are just, like, 45 degrees straight towards the middle of his face. But you can kind of see it here in this little moment. He's been caught by Thresh, right? He's literally got a chain around his goddamn neck. But where's his eyes? Where's he looking at? What's he actually thinking about? Not Thresh. He's still ignoring him. His eyes are pointing this way because he's looking for something. Like, he's completely ignoring him. he doesn't look at Thresh until... pretty much now. Like, that's how long it takes him. Because he's looking for the gun, he's trying to figure out what to do. And he's also trying to avoid looking at Thresh because he knows Senna is there, and he doesn't... Like we established, he's not necessarily fond of being seen through Senna's eyes right now. But I like that little moment of there is a subtlety here to his expression, even though it's still very angry, fighty 90s comics. Ah, my wife was dead. Ah. Like, it's still that, but there is that little moment of subtlety before we look at Thresh again, and then it's just anger time once more. Like, his whole mouth is just like, you can see it's kind of turned into a permanent downwards, like this frowny face. Whereas Thresh, of course, has a natural smile on his face, because of being a skull. But again, it's like, I like moments of subtle acting. Because, like, Thresh is like... there's not much to work with when it comes to Thresh's face. Like, he's a skull. They are famously short on expressions. But you still get the sense here, because of that little, slightly, like, the mouth hanging open. And because of the angle that you're viewing it from, so you get that slight curve up across there. You get the sense that he's grinning. Like, you get the sense that he's like, that he's having a very happy moment right now. And I wonder if there is... yeah, there is a moment. There is a moment. Like, when Lucian starts to make his move... by the way, I love the texture on Lucian's hair. You can really see it here. That's a lovely natural hair texture. You can see it here. When Lucian makes his move... right here, Thresh begins to look down and goes, hey, hang on, what's he doing? And then here, you can kind of see him try to follow what Lucian is doing with his hand, but it's too late. Kaboom! Bloosh! And we're going to have to talk about those smoke effects. Let me just have a look at... yeah, okay, so it's not the best explosion effect I've ever seen, but it's supposed to basically be an explosion of spirits. An explosion of smoke. Now, these kinds of very liquid smoke effects are something I've seen around... since StarCraft 2, pretty much, where they used it very much for Zeratul teleportation effects. And I have no idea how they're made. Like, I have no idea, but I do know that they are something that's composited onto things, usually fairly late in the process, but again, that's from watching behind-the-scenes stuff about the animation of StarCraft 2 back in the day. So that process may have changed, but, like, there's something that's, like, that's highly render-intensive. And I really, like, I don't know much about how they're made. I really don't. Because they, like, behind-the-scenes features rarely go into the technical details of shit. But what I really love about the way that they're used here is that because they have this very liquid, flowing feeling to them, you can kind of see, like, how things can kind of flow separate from each other. You can kind of see how you get this unified flow of, like, circular flow of the various spirits, but also a sense that each one is kind of billowing and flowing on its own. And I love that, like that sense right there, where the smoke is both kind of like it's kind of solid, right? It looks kind of solid. It looks like it has a surface, but it also can do this. It can also flatten itself out and become completely amorphous, almost like a liquid. And you can really see that here, where the sense I get from the motion that the smoke is making in these shots right here is that it's kind of writhing on itself. Like, it's kind of almost kind of massaging itself into shape. And it's almost kind of trying to condense itself. It's like a giant ball of worms trying to writhe into one large snake. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to describe, but I do like that sense of, like, where it's not just smoke. This is a living thing. Like, this is something that has a unified guiding mind, and it's trying to shape itself into something. And that's really well communicated here. And again, no bloody idea how any of these effects are made. I just know that they look absolutely gorgeous. My only criticism of them, really, and that's been my criticism of them since the StarCraft 2 days, is that they look, to an extent, they look much more fluid and alive and much more realistic, in a sense, than anything else in the scene. They don't look quite as cartoony as the rest, or at least their motion doesn't feel quite as stylized and cartoony as the rest of the scene. But that's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. It's like the minor kind of nitpick that I would come up with. And again, subtle acting. Lucian doesn't know what's going on. He's pointing the gun, and then it starts to dawn on him. And it's that little motion of the... I talked about the eyebrows a lot, because see what happens here? The tension lifts just a little bit. He's still angry. He's still like, I'm angry, I'm gonna kill her, get my wife. And then when it begins to dawn on him, you can see that little bit of unclenching, like that little bit of tension that goes out of his expression, and everything kind of relaxes a little bit, and all of a sudden, angry, dour face, downwards eyebrows Lucian, in this moment, he looks almost tender. Like, he looks almost innocent for a second. Look at that. Look at how that face transforms. Look how much younger he becomes all of a sudden when he lets go of all that. Like, when he lets go of that, all of a sudden he looks much younger. And because we have these bright white eyes that are being highlighted, you really get this sense of, like, especially when you slow it down and you just look at it like this, you really do get the sense of this moment of restored innocence a little bit. Like, this moment of feeling, emotion that's filling him up. Realization. And disbelief. Like, as though he can't quite understand what he's looking at, but he can't look away either. As Senna returns to the world. Definitely, totally the same as she was when she left. Nothing's changed. It's your wife. No compromises. Everything's fine. Oh, we'll talk about Senna's character design some other time. I love that little blink. Like, there. That little... There. Like, that little bit... Tiny little motion with the eyelids, which again kind of communicates this, like, he's almost like trying to blink to see if he's seeing an illusion, but he also doesn't want to actually blink because he can't take his eyes off her. And this, like, I just love the, like, there's a lot of subtle facial acting going on with Lucian in some of these shots, and it's necessary because, again, there's no dialogue here. There's nothing to work with except the facial expressions of the characters and the body language and the acting of the body. And by the way, speaking of tension being released, Lucian with the gun up. Tense. He's tense around the muscle. He's tense around the gun. He's holding it up, and, like, his shoulders are up. Everything is up. And then, even, like, when he realizes what's going on, even though he's wounded here, he begins to let go of that. He stops defending the wound. Like, what he was doing with his hand there was protecting the wound. But now he's letting himself be vulnerable for a second. Because, well, look who's here. And then the first thing she does is shoot him in the face with a gun, which I like very much. because as viewers, we're given this expectation that, like, she shows up, but, hey, we know that green glow. Like, that, we've seen that kind of green fire before, and it did not belong to people who weren't undead monstrosities called Thresh. So, and Lucian kind of seems to have that same moment of doubt a little bit. And then she pulls a cannon. It's just I laughed a little bit when I saw that the first time, because it's like, boomstick! And is no hesitation either. It's like, cannon, boom, shoot him in the face. Which is lovely. So anyway, Senna as a character, and this is something we'll talk about when we do What's the Deal with Senna sometime down the line, is about this tension between light and darkness, which is something that's been teased about her since frickin' day one. So we have this light, this bright golden light, which is often associated with healing in League of Legends, by the way, which is encased in this giant shadowy cloak, basically. So we have light hidden in shadow, which is what she is. Like, she's been a light that's been encased in shadow inside of Thresh's lantern for a very long time. She's been a literal light, like the light of her soul, like what Thresh picks up on the Rift. And you can see, again, the facial acting. Lucian here is just kind of, oh, I did not expect this to happen, and he drops his weapon. And here, Senna's face, like, that's an expression, isn't it? That's not anger, necessarily, but it's not, she's not, like, unconditionally happy to see him either. It's not like she's, oh, my love, I'm so... It's not anger. It's not like, she doesn't seem to blame him. It's almost like pity, a little bit. It's like, it's a really specific expression that's being shown here. And it's completely immovable, too. Like, there really isn't any wavering. She doesn't even blink. But it's also, it's an expression with determination. No hesitation whatsoever. And then just, like, the stuff we're kind of used to seeing from Riot Studios, just a bunch of gorgeous effects animation. And I love, like, this is something that Riot, they've kind of teased this kind of thing a little bit with Kayle in her old splash art, where her ultimate, the shield that she puts down on herself in the splash art, it looks like it's made of liquid gold, basically. And there's a little bit of that here, too, where the shield that she's giving him and the healing that presumably comes with it, I would imagine that's her kit, is that she heals, like, she can use her ultimate to heal an ally and shield them and then cause damage to enemies who are nearby. Maybe it's kind of a skill shot that you have to line up, I'm not sure. Which would synergize naturally with Lucian, because he can dash into a position where she can then use the ultimate to... Anyway, that's outside the scope. But here, look at this. Look how the surface ripples almost like water, and then it has this edge that's like fire. And that just gives a really lovely visual effect that's very, very efficient at just looking ethereal and strange and unreal. And then it's like, denied! And then the shadows follow up. So you have this golden healing light moving in a straight line towards Lucian, and then you have these shadows curling around, and then... Suck it! And speaking of Thresh, remember how I said it's hard to do acting with this guy? Well, they found a way, because that's a very surprised face to me. Like, that looks like a guy who's like, oh, this is not good. Boom! And once again, Thresh isn't really a character here. Like, he's just kind of, you had the lantern, now we're done with you, we don't care anymore. Our thing is about each other. And again, that streak of light that Lucian is. And again, you see the suddenness, the stop and start of it. Where, boom, and then look what happens once he gets there. Completely stands still here. And then we cut to the next shot where he actually grabs her. And what I do like here is that, like, Thresh's lantern is now reabsorbing all the souls that got out, right? Look what's coming out of Senna's back. Almost like angel wings. You can see that ghostly smoke, it's pouring out of her as well, and Lucian is helping her hold on to it, hold on to herself so that she doesn't get pulled in. And I love her boots, by the way. Those boots are cool as hell. And again, here we see again, Lucian has returned to tension in the face. There's tension now. You can see the wrinkles and stuff. But it's a very different kind of tension. It's kind of a... It's a man who's trying very hard not to cry, basically. But who's also, like, you can still see that he's in disbelief, like he doesn't quite believe what's happening. And for the very first fucking time that we have ever seen Lucian, his eyebrows aren't pointing downwards at a 45-degree angle towards the center of his face, because for the first time since we've ever known him, he's not angry. He's not angry. He's relieved, and maybe a little sad. And then there's Senna here, who, again, the facial acting is so good. You can see here that she also goes from... She has this moment of relief where it's like, Jesus Christ, it's finally over. Like, this part of the nightmare is over. And then you see the eyebrows do that little subtle motion from relief to concern to determination and or anger. As the green comes back and she opens her eyes. And this is not, again, it's not really anger as such. It's more of, it's kind of a recognition. It's a moment of, well, I know exactly what I am now. Like, it's a moment of coming to terms with what kind of situation she's in now. And that works really well. Anyway, all in all, lovely job teasing this one, Riot. I'm sure you feel very smug about that in the narrative office. Laurie, with your teasing and your planning and your setup. Oh, Fancy Boy earned his salary today, didn't he? I don't know why I'm being antagonistic. I think it's really cool. But God, I'm just gonna be waiting for you guys to follow up on whatever the hell Yasuo was doing in that thing. It's a lovely bit of an animated short. It's very impressive that they managed to set it up so far ahead of time. There's a lot of good character animation in here. The effects animation is stellar, as usual. I would have wished for it to have a little bit more length, like a little bit more time to breathe. Especially when clearly you had like a year and a half to make it happen. You had like a year and a half to extend this thing a little bit. Surely the fated confrontation between Lucian and Thresh can have a bit more than 3 minutes and 20. I mean, come on, give me more of this stuff, Riot, come on. But if you have enjoyed this long, rambly animation breakdown, then you should feel extremely free to hit the like, comment, and subscribe buttons, because those buttons are good. They do nice things for a YouTube channel, like allow it to live. So hit those. You can also, if you want to support this channel specifically, more directly, I have some tip jars down in the description, and there's my Patreon as well, if you want to sign up for a monthly subscription, rather than giving a one-time tip. And I would appreciate any and all of that. And as I try to say at the end of all my videos, for online content creators, small donations matter a lot. Like a $1 donation can be the same as 1,000 views on YouTube easily. Like, easily. Because ad revenue doesn't pay very much. So, whether it's me or someone else, and, you know, honestly, especially if it's someone else, especially if it's a small channel that's kind of just starting out, consider supporting content creators whose work you enjoy directly, when you can, because you make much more of a difference than you think, even with very small contributions. But if you can't, like if you're not in a position to be able to do that, believe me, anyone who's makes a living as a content creator knows that feeling. We know what it's like to be broke, and we don't blame anyone. I've sometimes gotten messages from people saying they're sorry that they're not supporting me on Patreon. It's like, no, please. For the love of God, it's enough that you watch the videos. The tip jars and Patreons are always only for people who can afford to, like, do a little extra. So, don't ever feel bad about it. Anyway, if you haven't enjoyed this video, well, then look below the video and there you will see the ancient artifact of Disilaki. And in there, gaze deep into its heart, and you will see the eyes of the one you love gazing back out at you. Will you chase it? Will you strike it? Will you try to destroy it in a vain hope of releasing them from their torment? And in doing so, are you merely becoming one of their tormentors? What I'm saying is hit the like button instead, because it comes without all these moral complications that are so tedious to deal with. Thank you very much for watching.